And now I'd like to introduce our final team of co-presenters this evening, Catharine Hume and Munro. It's a coincidence that we have two Aarons, a her Aaron and a he Aaron, as you're about to find out. Both Munro and Catharine Hume work for an important partner, community partner of Vancouver Coastal Health, and that's RainCity Housing. Catharine currently provides organizational development support to RainCity Housing. And before RainCity, Catharine was the director of the Mental Health Commission of Canada's At Home Chez research demonstration project. Before that, she was in a position, we worked together at Vancouver Foundation, and before that, she worked at the Canadian Mental Health Association. Throughout her career, Catharine has been an incredibly effective ally of people with lived experience of mental illness and substance use and homelessness by really focusing on engaging people directly in the processes and the structures that impact their lives. And I know this to be true. I know this to be true because I had the very good fortune of hiring Catharine right out of grad school 24 years ago. I can't believe I just said that. 24 years ago, when I was working at the Canadian Mental Health Association, and we hired Catharine. Of course, Catharine was 8 at the time, and I was 14. Erin, on the other hand, is much younger than Catharine and me. Erin is a queer trans activist, community worker, and the acting associate director at RainCity Housing. He's worked with the homeless population in the Downtown Eastside for most of the past 10 years. Erin strongly believes in community-identified solutions to community-identified issues and problems. I think we're going to have Catharine and then Erin. They're going to tag team. So Catharine, come on up.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to the Foundation and to the sponsors of this event for creating these opportunities for, not so much for people to talk, but hopefully to engage around the issues of mental health and stigma. This is a topic that's close to probably all of our hearts, either because of direct experience in our own lives around mental health issues, substance use issues, poverty, homelessness, trauma, or people very close to us who have experienced some or all of those things that do such a profound job at marginalizing people and disconnecting them from the wider community. I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about the At Home Chez project because there were a lot of pieces to that research demonstration project that really speak to issues of structural stigma that still exist within the ways we think about and build out housing for people with mental health issues and substance use issues. I was really fortunate in 2008 to be asked to lead the Vancouver site of the At Home Chez project, which was the largest research demonstration project of its kind on homelessness, mental health and substance use issues in the world, the largest investment in community mental health research in Canada ever. It was $110 million that was put towards really understanding the extent to which a housing first model, and I'll describe what that means in a sec, what a particular model of housing for people with mental health and substance use issues experiencing homelessness, what the outcomes would be for people as compared to a group of people who we followed in a research way, but didn't provide that. So it was sort of a really high bar from a research perspective. It was a randomized control trial. We worked with over 2,000 people experiencing homelessness, mental health, and substance use from across the country, about 500 people in Vancouver. About half of those people received Housing First supports, and about half of those people did not receive Housing First supports. They received the kinds of supports that were available to them around homelessness, mental health, and substance use in their communities. And it was an opportunity to really ask some questions about a different model than was kind of traditionally used in Canada, and to really challenge some assumptions that certainly existed in this city and existed in many, many communities across the country when we started. Many of the assumptions continue to exist, and so I want to kind of pick those apart a little bit. So like anything, when a new term comes into to the world, lots of people talk about how they do it. Housing first is one of those concepts that sort of everybody now does housing first. I'm gonna challenge that a little bit by describing really specifically what the housing first intervention was that we initiated here in Vancouver and in other communities across the country. And just to start, the key, I want to go through the key principles of housing first. So the first one is immediate access to housing. And that sounds like a fairly straightforward kind of thing. Somebody's homeless, they have mental health issues, they have substance use issues. Clearly, access to housing would be an important first step. But in fact, our system, both here and in many other communities across the country and in other, in the US, really still focus on housing readiness. So the notion that, you've got to prove somehow that you are ready to be housed. And so that notion, although silly, perhaps, to people, I can see a few people not shaking their heads, in fact still permeates how we deliver housing supports in many, many communities. So it's this idea of let's start with getting you ready for housing as opposed to you're homeless. Well, that in and of itself is why you're ready for housing. The second housing first principle is choice. And this is another principle around allowing people options beyond incredibly limited and for probably most of us deeply unappealing options like single room occupancy hotels or shelters or big buildings with big signs on them that point to the fact that you have struggled with homelessness or mental health or substance use issues. And so what the Housing First approach does is it offers a new choice into the mix of options. It includes those options for people who would choose those, but it includes rental housing subsidies. So it opens up private market, lower end, private market units across a city or a community and puts that on the table as an option for folks. The third Housing First principle is around recovery, and for sure, I don't need to talk about that, having just listened to and having you all have heard from Erin about what recovery is in so many ways, so many rich ways. At the root of it, in the context of a housing first approach, it's really identifying and reclaiming valued roles. So whether that's a role as a parent or a role as a friend or an employee or whatever those roles are, it's about that. It's not about eliminating symptoms, stopping substance use, doing any of those kinds of things. It may include those things at different points in time, but it's much, much more about valued roles. The fourth is around individualized, working with people in individualized ways. And so the flip that Housing First creates for people is it's a conversation that starts with what most people who experience homelessness and mental health issues and substance use issues say they most want, which is tenancy, a home. And so when you start there, you don't start with people's symptoms, you don't start with their substance use, you don't start with any of those conversations. You start with what they say they want. You provide that, you build a relationship of trust, and then you talk about those things either and when the person is ready to have those conversations and or when those things are getting in the way of their tenancy, which is their personal goal, is maintaining that housing. So it's a flip. And the last one is integration, and arguably that's the first one, is creating spaces for people to feel like they can belong again in a wider network of the community. And I'll just tell a quick story, which to me was super symbolic. We were pretty, some of us, I was pretty simplistic when we started this project. You're going to get housing, you're going to choose your neighborhood, you're going to have an outreach-based service that's going to come and meet with you and talk to you about the things that you care about and work with you from there. It's going to be great. And it was for many people. But for many people, it was really complicated. People felt isolated, they felt lonely, they felt like they didn't deserve housing options. And there was this one gentleman who had lived in the Downtown Eastside for a number of years. And he moved into an apartment in another community or another neighborhood. And it took him over a year to walk down his own street. He felt he belonged in the alley. So he always went out the back door. He always walked along the alley because that's where he felt he belonged. So I think that story to me really illustrates how deep and profound people's dislocation is and how greatly they feel that they don't belong at certain times. And of course, it's a call to action to remember that and to do whatever you can to help people feel like they belong as early as possible or immediately. So the next thing I just want to talk a little bit about is some of the assumptions, because the reason At Home, from my perspective, was such an exciting project to be involved in Vancouver is it wasn't actually a new model, this Housing First model. We've been talking about it for years and years and years. But there were a whole lot of assumptions that got sort of thrown up at the beginning of the project, and I just want to go through some of those. So one big assumption was that the people in Vancouver who were homeless and had mental illness and substance use issues, among other things in their lives, weren't ready for housing. And that our job in the system, whether that was the housing system, the mental health system, was to get them ready. Well, and what that creates is this idea that we can all kind of come around people and help them move from one step to another step, from a shelter maybe to an SRO, and maybe if they're lucky into a congregate building, and then maybe if they're super lucky, win the lottery into an apartment that people without those complex experiences of marginalization would consider just sort of the norm. And what was fantastic was to work with this group of 2,000 people across the country, the 1,000 of which experienced homelessness and mental illness, and to actually demonstrate that, in fact, the vast majority of people settle into their housing immediately. Now, that doesn't mean that their mental health issues go away. It doesn't mean their substance use issues go away, but the majority of people are able to maintain tenancy. A number of people, need an eviction, and then they learn from the eviction, and then they maintain their tenancy. But the vast majority of people don't need us to get them ready for housing. The second assumption that we heard lots about was, and I think is still very pervasive, is homelessness is a result of mental illness and substance use. That is not true. Homelessness is the result of poverty and a scarcity of affordable housing. People with mental illness and substance use are people who are at times less able to navigate and get in there, but it's absolutely not the case that homelessness is the result of mental illness and substance use. Another assumption that we heard really early on is that people in Vancouver are too sick. They use poly substances, it's complicated, substance use, mental health issues, more complicated than other places, and so there's no way they're going to stay housed or demonstrate that this can work. The demonstration project kind of blew that out of the water. Another was that people living in the Downtown Eastside wouldn't choose to live in another neighborhood in the community. And that was a very strong assumption early on. And there were people who felt very connected to the Downtown Eastside community and who chose to stay there. But the vast majority of people chose other options, neighborhoods throughout the city. Another assumption was that landlords wouldn't buy into this model. Private market landlords, pre-Olympics, everybody was going to make $1 gazillion as a landlord pre-Olympics, and that there was no way that they were going to kind of take the risk of offering housing using this housing subsidy model and this outreach-based model. We were surprised, I think that was probably an assumption that a number of us shared, to find that over the course of the project, not only were we able to secure over 200 private market housing units in Vancouver and a few outlying communities, but in fact we were turning landlords away. And so the reality is landlords rent to people with mental illness and substance use all the time. And they don't have anything to rely on if things go sideways. And so what the Housing First approach was able to offer landlords was a partnership in that we were able to respond to people and issues to avoid evictions in many, many cases, and in some cases to support people to find other options so that they weren't being evicted into homelessness. The next one was that people won't stay housed. Again, some people for sure didn't stay housed. Some people had multiple evictions. The vast majority of people were able to maintain their tenancy once they found a housing unit that was a good fit for them. Another that maybe because I'm with RainCity in particular, I want to speak to a little bit was that the not-for-profit sector wasn't capable of really providing good clinical care in a sort of community treatment team model, which is the model that Erin was describing. And that assumption was also proven wrong. RainCity Housing was the best sort of community treatment housing first team in the whole country within the project, and continues to be a very, very strong clinical team because of its, in part, I think, because of its ability to be nimble and responsive and creative in ways that has certainly made it an outstanding team. The last one I want to talk a little bit about is this notion that the housing options reflect what people need. And that people need the shelters. It's no question that some people need shelters, but most people need shelters, or most people need SROs, or group homes, or big buildings, and I just want to remind people it's not because that's what people need. It's that they have a scarcity of options. We think based on the models that we've provided historically, which in some cases have been built around discrimination and stigma and separating people out of community, not integrating them into community, and that the housing structures that we've put in place are more based on that and about what we actually believe is possible for people as a community, which we often really don't believe many things are possible for people. Versus what people want and what they can achieve. And when thinking of Erin's comment about the psychiatrist who, I think it was a psychiatrist who essentially said, that's it, you're done, not much to be thinking about moving forward in terms of goals and aspirations in your life. We do that to people as well. We do that by saying, here's the options, and they're all pretty not great, and that's the best you can hope for. So on that note, I'm going to skip my next slide because I'm pretty sure I must be close to the end. And I just want to talk about, well, I'll let you look at this. This is a quote from one of the people in Winnipeg who was housed through the project. I could go on with a lot of stats. There's over 100 peer-reviewed publications coming out of the at-home Chez project. Unfortunately, I'm not very good with stats, so I do a really bad job. But I could tell you lots and lots of findings. I've told you the high-level ones, which is that people can and do maintain housing of choice. People move forward in their lives in profound ways when we start with housing that is based on their choice and preference. But to me, one of the most remarkable findings of a $110 million research project is that we can't predict. We can't predict who will do well. It doesn't matter if you've been homeless for 25 years. It doesn't matter if you have 12 diagnoses. It doesn't matter if you've used 30,000 different substances in your history. None of those things, either individually or combined, predict who will do well, and the majority of people do well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, again, my name is Erin Munro and I work for RainCity Housing and Support Society as an acting associate director. And I'm also a person with lived experience of what gets called mental illness, problematic substance use, and recovery. And thanks for your story today, Erin, because I think it's really important that when we have enough safety in life, that we're out about those experiences. Just going to introduce you to a couple of resources on Catharine's last slide. The first one is the at-home Chez National Film Board link, where you can watch films from all five cities that participated in the at-home Chez study. And I know some people who are in these videos are both service providers and also people who participated in the study. And there's some brilliant stories, and they're really, really worth checking out. The second one is a community development project that I did for RainCity Housing and Support Society a few years ago. It's news. It's called New Evolution of Wise Storytelling. Again, you can watch some videos of people sharing their stories. We created this project out of focus groups we did with people who are living with poverty, what gets called mental illness and problematic substance use. And I'll never forget a really brilliant young woman who said to me, "I can handle my mental illness, it's poverty that's driving me insane." So one of the ethics of this project is we went out and got people who were in recovery and were not living in poverty to share their stories, along with people who were living in poverty, which really outs what's the determining factor for people doing well in our community. The last is a series of videos that RainCity Housing did with a number of other partners in the sector about Housing First, and they're actually training videos, but they're quite entertaining as well. So if you want to learn more about Housing First, you can check those out. Catharine spoke quite a bit about Housing First, but I think one of the things that I've appreciated throughout my work is that it allows people to make mistakes. So many of our systems are set up without kind of realizing how we actually learn, and I think most of us in this room can understand that we learn quite often because we mess up, and then we try again, and sometimes we mess up again. That'd be the story of my life. But eventually we figure it out. So in the Housing First model, we house people, and if they fail, that's their failure, not ours, we recognize, and we try rehousing them again. And we keep doing that until they figure it out. And I think that's really important, because if we look at how traditionally we've worked with, especially with this population, it's been very institutional. And if you think about our institutions, they don't allow us to make a lot of mistakes, right? Probably the place you're going to learn the least is prison, because everything that you do is sort of situated in a certain way. So for me, like on the ground working with folks, that ability to make a mistake and still be believed in, that the next time might be different, or there's different possibilities, is really, really crucial. I wanted to share this story. I was working in a housing project quite some years ago, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he came up to me and he said, "You know, Aaron, I'm just feeling super paranoid, and I think people are looking at me, and I'm not feeling so good." And I was like, "Well, what's going on?" And we had to start this conversation, and then I looked up and I looked at all the cameras that were on us in that moment, and I was like, "Hey," you know? And he looks up and we both started to laugh, you know? And I was like, "I'm pretty sure there's probably 2 or 3 people sitting in an office right now watching you," right? And we both had a bit of a laugh about that. But we began to map out all the places that he goes in his day, you know, to the ministry office, to his doctor, to, you know, and in all those places there's cameras. So when you're living in poverty, you're under a certain kind of surveillance. Now, I can't fix that for him, and nor does he have the power to fix that. But we came up with some strategies, like wearing a hat and, you know, things like that, so that he could, you know, he wouldn't have to feel so surveilled all the time. But I think that's the problem with the structural stigma, is it actually makes it really difficult to see what is actually illness and what's the structures that are actually really happening to us on a daily basis. Another story I thought I'd share is I was outside my house a few years ago, and I ran into somebody who I'd met when I first started doing this work about a decade ago, when I was working in a single room occupancy hotel, and it was a pretty hard place back then. And he said to me, "You know, Aaron, it's nice to run into you, and we're catching up, sitting on this curb, you know," and he said to me, "You know, I'm so sorry you worked there." And I thought, what a generous statement. I'm so sorry you lived there, right? And we sat and we talked about it, and he said, people were really awful to people there, you know, like they victimized each other, they stole from each other, you know, all these kinds of concepts, right? And I had a little laugh to myself, because I remember him participating quite a bit in all that. But I said to him, you know, I was like, you know, there's structures in place. Like, people didn't have enough resources. You know, people didn't have enough food. People were, you know, crammed in spaces that were too tight for human beings to be living in. And we started having a conversation, unpacking some of this stuff. And, you know, you could see he was like, kind of like, "Oh, wow, hey, I had never thought about it that way." And he seemed lighter afterwards. And I felt a pretty deep sense of shame in that moment, because I thought, I wonder how many workers have worked with this man and never pointed this out, which puts those problems deeply inside of him, rather than in society where we can actually fix them, and putting it on the people who have the power to, and, you know, and can change the social structures. So I just wanted to think a little bit about what recovery has meant for me, and still does. And I think for me, it was when I got to a place that I didn't regret all of my experience, you know, that I could look at some of the things that I'd gone through and realize that they might be useful for other people, and I could apply them. And I think we need to create more avenues for people. Peer support positions are a great example, where people can give back to community and share all this rich knowledge that they have because of their experiences. And I think that's beneficial for us all. I'm just going to say a couple more things here. Maybe I'll just say there is one good thing about homelessness, and that's that we can solve it. Like, it's actually pretty solvable. It's just going to take some will, you know. And I wanted to leave you with 3 just really quick thoughts about what I think would help us change that. And I think one is that we need to reject tough love concepts, right? People have already had tough enough lives, so putting them through more misery is not going to be helpful. So we need to design our services, the way we behave to people in public transit, our hospitals, all of our systems, to be empathetic and caring of people who've had really, really tough lives. I think we need to forget about the notion that we're one check away from being homeless. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. Myself, in my life right now, I've got enough friends, family, community around me that if I lost my job tomorrow, hopefully not for something I say tonight, I wouldn't be homeless. And so I think I think it's really important to note that, right? We're talking about people who don't have social connections to keep them from being homeless. So our responses and the way we treat people need to develop social connections across difference. And I think that's something we can all take part in, again, in our schools, buses, wherever we're at within our community. And just to finish off, I just wanted to say that I also think that we need to move away from a charity approach. That's not going to solve it either. We need to realize that every single person in this room, every single person in Vancouver is better off if we solve homelessness. We all will have more psychological safety if we realize that our community just wouldn't let that happen to us. Thanks so much.
Okay. One of you left your notes up here? I did. You did, okay. Do you need them? No, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Erin.